go from there. So the title of the topic is the Autism and the Gut, and this is continuing in the series that we've been doing on the gut-brain axis. So just to get started, I know, Chad, I didn't ask you this ahead of time. Did you cover this text in your series?
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did not. Great. So many of you are familiar with this text in the book of Revelation. We're going to read it together. Revelation 10, 8 through 11. And it says, "Then the voice which I heard from heaven spoke to me again and said, 'Go, take the little scroll which is open in the hand of the angel who stands on the sea and on the earth.' So I went to the angel and I said to him, 'Give me the little book.' And he said to me, 'Take it, eat it, and it will make your stomach bitter, but it will be as sweet as honey to your mouth.' Then I took the book out of the angel's hand and ate it, and it was as sweet as honey in my mouth. But when I had eaten it, my stomach became bitter. And he said to me, 'You must prophesy again about many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings.'" Now, many of you who are familiar with prophecy would say, what in the world does this have to do with the gut and autism? And you would be right. That's a very good question. But there is a principle here that is being established. The idea is that the prophet John, or John the Revelator, John the Apostle, is eating a scroll, sweet to his mouth, but then it makes his stomach bitter. And it is actually sort of how would I put it? It is an example of how what we eat sometimes influences how we feel. In this case, he was given a wonderful message. He was given a wonderful message, and he was willing to say it and give it, and then at the end of it, he was very bitter in his stomach. In the Hebrew understanding of the gut-brain axis, the stomach, the gut, was the seat of emotion. And you can see why he would say, "This is what made me bitter." They would often feel things deep within their bowels. This is how they understood their feelings. If you read in Luke chapter 24, where the disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus is walking with them. And then it says, "And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded unto them the things concerning themselves. And after Jesus left them, they said, 'Did not our hearts burn within us?'" So the Hebrew understanding is your heart was the seat of reasoning, but your gut was the seat of feeling. And this is the idea that our gut influences how we feel. And they didn't have autism back then for a number of reasons, but had they did that, they would have clearly seen a link between how we feel, dysregulation here in our gut, and dysregulation in our mind, or vice versa, dysregulation in our mind and dysregulation in our gut. So, before we go any further in the presentation, we're going to ask the Lord to be with us in prayer. So let us bow our heads. Gracious and Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the time that we have together. We just pray that the difficulties will be behind us and we will be able to explain this in a way that makes sense. I thank you so much for the light that you give us from heaven, and I also thank you for the light that you give us in nature to demonstrate these principles which you set forth in the light that you have given to the world to heal itself from many of the maladies that we face. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. Okay, so autism. The term was coined in 1912 by a psychiatrist named Paul Bleuler, and it comes from the Greek word autos, which means self. And the idea is that people who had autism were morbidly self-absorbed. Now this is interesting because why is that? Well, because people with autism have the inability to connect with others. They sometimes lack the social cues, and so people would naturally think that they're selfish. Autism was considered a psychiatric disease. In other words, they had no idea what caused it. And so they would lock people up who had autism. They would give them terrible drugs. They would do all kinds of things to them. But this is kind of where it comes from. And it was exceptionally rare in 1912. In 1981, a pediatrician named Hans Asperger, which is where we get the term Asperger's syndrome, he was, again, a psychiatrist. And he came up with this idea that Asperger, which is named after him, that there are people with this autism that have a hard time integrating, but are actually very, very smart. They are high functioning, but they are unable to pick up the social cues and integrate themselves effectively in society. And so this is where it actually all starts here. These psychiatrists who were looking into this. This is Leo Kanner. He's the first one to write a book on this issue. You can see it is in 1949. He's writing a article here. You see it's called The Autistic Disturbances of Affective Contact, which is right there. So anyways, he's writing this, and what he's trying to do, or the psychiatrists were trying to do, was to distinguish autism from schizophrenia. Schizophrenia means split brain. Many people think we know what it is, but truth of the matter is that its causes have eluded psychiatrists for a long time. The drugs are absolutely horrible. And this was actually a godsend, because if you could distinguish autism from schizophrenia, you would find a way to treat it differently, which was actually a good thing. So this is from the community, the autism community in action, and they have wonderful diagrams and examples here. And so I just want you to see some facts about autism. So they say that up to 30% of children who have autism are minimally verbal. That means they talk very little. 38% have seizures, 40% have anxiety, 53% have problems sleeping. The children with autism 4 times to suffer gut issues or GI issues than the standard population. They actually don't get much of the health care they need. Most of them only live to the average age of 36, which tells you it's not just a mind thing, it's a whole body thing. And only 10% of them are ever able to live on their own. So this is actually a real problem, because we have a lot of adults who are raising children who they may leave behind who will not be able to live on their own. So this is quite a problem we have. If you look here, I want you to follow this because you see the big number there. But in 1970, it was 1 in 10,000. In 1995, it was 1 in 500. And this was probably back in 2000 or 2001, 1 in 68. Today, it's 1 in 36. 1 in 36 children born today will be diagnosed with autism. Now, you could say, oh, well, we're just better at diagnosing. But there's no way you get better at diagnosing to go from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 36. No way. I'm sorry, especially if you thought it was a genetic disease. So many people who are in the autism community are convinced that there is environmental pressures that are driving this problem among children. We have known about the gut as it relates to a deranged mind. This is actually a condition which does happen. Sometimes it is congenital. Sometimes it is just mechanical. But this is a condition called intussusception. And so what you see here is this is the bowel. This is the small intestine. And what happens is it gets folded on itself like that, pinching some of the arteries and veins in here. And you can see it on this sectional view right here. See, this all gets pinched. This is an omentum. And the arteries and everything get pinched in here. What happens is this section of the small intestine becomes deranged and eventually becomes necrotic and dies. And when this happens, people literally lose their minds. Even though they're in pain, they lose their minds. And so we've known for the longest time that people who get damage to their small intestine where it folds in like this and they lose blood flow, that they have a deranged mind. So the idea of the gut and the mind has been well established for a long time. Indeed, here's an article here. This was published in, I believe, 1971, and this was published by a number of psychiatrists. This is from the Journal of Autism and Childhood Schizophrenia in 1971. And what they did is they examined a number of children, and they put electrodes on their head, and they would feed them a diet which we either have casein, which comes from dairy, or gliadin or gluten, which comes from wheat, and they would be able to detect action potentials or spikes in electrical activity in their brain. They were able to do that, and what that meant is that these things that they were eating were sending their brain into a tizzy, so to speak. And it's interesting that a lot of these kids were being treated for schizophrenia, so they were given all these drugs, they were told that they would grow out of it and all this other stuff, the whole while the psychiatrists were ignoring all the GI issues that they were having. So it shows you that even back as 1971, even though this was 1 in 10,000, they noticed that there was an issue with the gut and autism, and it was being ignored. Like I said, many of these children were diagnosed with schizophrenia, warehoused, put on drugs, and forgotten. So again, now that we're 1 in 36, we have tried to develop better strategies of treating it. Now, this is an interesting article. This was published in 1998. This is from the Lancet, and many of you have heard about this when it comes to autism. This idea with Andrew Wakefield talking about our favorite pharmaceutical injectable products causing autism, and you can see it was retracted here in the Lancet. And this is on the other side of it is the Canadian Medical Journal, and they are talking about why this article was retracted. But I just want you to notice something here because something was missed. Tell me, do you see the word vaccine in here at all in the title of this? Just go ahead and look. Just tell me, because I've been staring at it for a while. I don't see it. Maybe some of you do. Anyone? I'm not even sure any of these words begin with V. So it's not there, is it? His whole entire article, if you read it, his whole entire article, if you read it, is actually about the immune system, Sean will tell you over 72% of your immune system is in your gut. And so what he proposed is that there was some sort of immune dysregulation that was affecting the gut of these children with autism, and he felt that perhaps it could be related to a schedule of injections that these children were getting. That's what he said, and it was like 1 or 2 sentences. And the whole world said, no, we're not talking about this, and this has actually been one of the greatest disservices to the autism community. Well, now when you say that autism is related to the gut or autism is related to immune dysregulation, people automatically say, well, you're just a crazy person following this discredited doctor who published this article was retracted. But that's actually not the case. There's a lot of evidence, as I'm going to show you, that we have known that autism is related to the gut. This is an article published in 2003, and they actually look at the different gut conditions and how it creates encephalopathy. Encephalopathy is essentially the swelling of the brain, and they talk about how certain foods can irritate your opioid receptors, namely your dairy products, and that can affect the opioid receptors in your gut, can then affect the central nervous system and your brain, which is amazing. And so they were talking about this in 2003. And let's see, what is this, 2000? What do we have here? 2000. This is another article, 2003. This is a great article. And in this article, I just only put the subsections here. And notice he says, earlier studies pointing to a linkage between gut function and autism, the leaky gut hypothesis. Children with autism have gastrointestinal pathology, possible pathways which intestinal function may become impaired, the nature and change of intestinal permeability in autism, how might impaired intestinal function influence autistic behavior, overacidity of the intestinal lumina, contents due to secretion or hyposecretion of secretin, metabolites and gluten in milk interfere with brain function. This is a review article, and these are all the topics that they have data on that influence the mind and influence autism. Now, it's okay if you don't know what all these are, but what you need to know is that every single one of these deal with digestion, what you eat, and how much of you eat of it. So this was published in 2003. And so the communities that are very interested in autism have been studying these things for quite some time. This is another article talking about the GI issues in the gut, and I'm trying to see when this one was published. This was published in 2007. So again, more of it's still there. I'm just showing you sort of a series of all these articles. This article is very good, and this talks about all the different issues that are leading to autism and the number of disorders with it. Now, you must understand that with autism, they estimate between 46% and 84% of all children with autism have gut issues. So between half and almost 90% of children who have autism have some sort of gut issues. And the problem is that it is multifaceted. It just isn't microbiome. It just isn't a dysregulated immune system. It just isn't digestive disorders. It is a whole plethora of symptoms that go together in this. And again, these physicians and people who are all happy with pharmaceutical injectable products all are seeing this connection between the gut and autism. This was published in 2012. Here's another article. This was also published in the World Journal of Clinical Pediatrics, and this article was published in 2021. And yes, 2021. And this also goes along and talks about the different ideas of the autoimmune allergic disorders. So children who have certain allergies are more likely, and children who have autism are more likely to have food allergies and things like that. There are metabolic disorders. It means children are unable to process the nutrients they need, and this creates other problems in the central nervous system. Children with autism also have sleep problems, and this is also because you have a deranged gut. And then, of course, GI disorders. This would be inflammation in the bowel and chronic ileitis, and, of course, things like diarrhea, constipation, etc. And again, notice the connection over and over and over again. All these scientists, all these people keep seeing this problem with autism. Here's another fascinating study. So how many of you have heard of Clostridium difficile? Anyone? I knew that guy back there for sure did. Yes. So Clostridium difficile is a bacteria that lives in your gut. And and I know Sean does too. it lives in your gut, but what happens is that through taking a course of antibiotics, you can kill all the other good bacteria, and it allows Clostridium difficile to grow rapidly. And Clostridium difficile, if it grows rapidly, can cause all sorts of problems, diarrhea, dehydration, and even death. And so one of the things they sometimes have to do is give you super strong antibiotics to kill it. Well, one of the things they've noticed in children with autism is they have more of these poisonous type of bacteria than they have good bacteria. And so in this chart, which I don't expect anyone to read, but what they do is they show all the different Clostridium different microbes. There's Clostridium difficile, and they have a whole bunch of other ones. And what they've noticed is that there are some that grow only in children with autism, and some that do not and only grow in people with healthy guts. And so what they're trying to figure out is what type of bacteria do we need in our gut in order to help children with autism. So again, more studies demonstrating, this was a 2002 article. So definitely microflora has something to do with it. Also, digestion has something to do with it. And one of the big ones for children with autism is the ability to process carbohydrates and starches. And you can see here, this is a normal digestive pattern. So what happens is you eat your starches and they get broken down. They get broken down, they hit the receptors like this, they eventually get processed. After they get processed, they enter in the bloodstream, no problem. That's what you want. That's great. But with children with autism, what they find is that it doesn't always work out that way. So what you end up having here is that instead of the monosaccharides, polysaccharides, or the starches or the carbohydrates being broken down, they do not get broken down and they create inflammation. And they end up coming into the blood whole chains, and this leads to more inflammation. It also leads to problems with digestion, and it creates more bad bacteria. So the point is that there's something in children with autism where they are unable to process carbohydrates the way that we normally would. And so that is an issue for them as well. So again, we're talking about gut flora. We're talking about dysregulation of autoimmune or dysregulation of the immune system, food allergies, food sensitivities, the inability to break down carbohydrates. And just to show you just how complex this picture is, you can see in this article here, this is a 2013 article, and this is I'm not asking you to make sense of this chart. You're welcome to take a picture of it. Yeah, feel free. But what they're trying to show you here is the number of things that can happen. So one is children with autism have a difficulty of removing toxic heavy metals. Did you know that each one of us, as long as we have a functioning immune system and organs of elimination, we're removing heavy metals from our body almost all the time? It's probably good for some of us to sweat, get sunlight. Sometimes taking B vitamins helps excrete some of that. There's some foods that help get rid of that. But children with autism are unable to excrete toxic heavy metals. And so this can lead to gastrointestinal inflammation, increased gut permeability. Sean talked about lipopolysaccharide. It's just a marker for bacteria that gets into your blood and increases inflammation. And then this is the scary part. When you get all this going into the bloodstream, it says breach of blood-brain barrier and subsequent neuroinflammation. So think about it. You go increased gut permeability, increased inflammatory markers in your blood to opening up the blood-brain barrier, and then the increased inflammatory markers get into the brain, and this leads to autism spectrum disorder. And that's just one thing. There are many others. They talk about decreased antioxidant activity. So you have antioxidants in your body like glutathione, and if that gets used up, increased gastroinflammation, increased inflammatory markers, breach of blood-brain barrier, autism spectrum disorder. And you could just keep going on over and over again. Through all of these that you have here, you don't have the metabolism to make more sulfur, you're unable to make more glutathione, increased gut permeability, inflammatory markers, brain barrier, autism. Inability to do methylation, that's important for renewing your DNA, that's important for renewing your cells and protecting them. You don't get that, problems. And so it just shows you how complex the picture is. But I want you to see this, and they also mention, I almost don't want to forget about ingestion of gluten or casein. Now, I want you to understand this. In the Bible, it talks about them going to the land of milk and honey. And many people go, well, milk is bad for you. Yes, in many cases, the way we process milk today, it is bad for you. In Moses' day and all the way up to Jesus' day, they didn't develop hormones where they injected them into cows so they could keep calving many years without ever calving. In other words, they would keep producing milk even though they weren't producing calves. We do that today. We inject our cows with hormones so they keep producing milk even though they're not producing calves. That's what we do. So our milk is contaminated by that. On top of that, we have factory farming where the cows lay in their own feces, and that gets in the milk product, which means you have to pasteurize it, which means it's a different product, and et cetera, et cetera. It's not good for you anymore. Right. Casein. All you have to do is read in the Bible, gluten. All you have to do is read in the Bible about the bread, the table of showbread in the temple or in the tabernacle, where you would have the bread of presence, is what it was called. And bread was normally considered the staff of life in the Bible. But here's the thing they didn't have in the Bible in those days. They didn't have glyphosate. I know it's surprising because we're so used to it, and we're told that it's safe and effective, but they didn't have glyphosate back then. And because they didn't have glyphosate back then, that didn't cause dysregulation and things like that. So what I'm trying to tell you is that there are foods that would normally be good for us, but they have been contaminated by what we've done to the earth, and this is not good. So again, these products, wheat products and milk products, gastrointestinal inflammation, increased gut permeability, inflammatory markers in the blood, breach of blood-brain barrier, autism. So again, over and over again, you can see these things in there. This is from the Autism Community in Action, and they do wonderful diagrams here, and I just want you to see this. And honestly, anyone who's interested in autism, go to their website. They're a wonderful resource. Check them out. I was very impressed with everything they talked about. But this is very simple. They're talking about folate. Now, folate, is anyone ever been on methotrexate? Anyone been on methotrexate? Good, I'm glad. That's awesome. Methotrexate is an anti-cancer drug that they give with people with rheumatoid arthritis. And what it does is it blocks the usage of folate. And that when it blocks the usage of folate, what happens is that inhibits your body to repair itself, and it stops the division of cells, so to speak. So folate's very important for that process, and methotrexate does that to stop cancer growth, but also to stop the autoimmune cells being rapidly proliferated in your body. It is a very toxic drug, and it makes your life miserable. But in autism, you need folate. You need folate for your cells. You need them in order for them to be healthy and divide. You need them for your central nervous system. But what they mention here is they notice how they point to dairy here. So here's dairy. And they say that dairy, these casein proteins, they can get on these cell receptors, which is on the cell, which it needs, and it needs folate, and it blocks them. And you can see it blocking them here. Normally, the folate gets in here, the cells are able to do what it needs, but it blocks them. And then this happens in your central nervous system doesn't function. So, just a short of it. Dairy in children with autism blocks the uptake of vitamin B9. Without vitamin B9, the cells are unable to repair themselves and they die. And that's messed up, especially when it gets in your central nervous system. Here's another one. And this is an interesting one. How many of you ever eaten at a Chinese restaurant and got a headache afterwards, right? Because of MSG, right. Monosodium glutamate happens. And so MSG is a part of, is essentially a derivative of the amino acid glutamate, and that actually is responsible for what we call excitotoxins. And what that does is it can affect the central nervous system, leading to too much dopamine, too many, and other problems in the brain, seizures and things like that. And so they point out here that it's very important when you're feeding children who have autism to stay away from sometimes what we call natural flavors, which have MSG and other things in there, because you want a good balance between GABA and glutamate. In other words, you want the nervous tissue not to have too much or the other, and so therefore you want to eliminate where you're getting it in your diet. So no MSG for kids as well. This is just a wonderful diagram to show you what I was talking about. Well, you know how we talk about leaky gut, right? So if you see these things right here, these represent tight junctions in the brush border of your gut. These are enterocytes, and they have a brush border here, so it absorbs whatever you eat in your body, okay? And it goes here, it gets lysed, eventually gets into the bloodstream, but it goes through a process. When you have inflammation or dysregulation of the gut, see these tight junctions? They're no longer there. And so these proteins and food particles go right through and they get into the blood, which creates more inflammation. So you can see this here, why this whole idea about leaky gut. Now, there are people who have leaky gut who don't have autism, but it probably is affecting their brain whether they know it or not. So this is another theory of why they see this also corresponding with autism, which is why they recommend gluten, casein-free diets. This is another one. This is food allergies. So what happens is you eat something that, say, you're allergic to. Let's say you're allergic to citrus or nuts, and so this represents some sort of protein from there. And your immune cells are in there, and they get attached to this, and then they start freaking out, and they send out all this histamine and all these inflammatory markers, and this goes all throughout your gut, because remember, 72% of your immune system is in your gut, and that also opens up the channels here, leading to more inflammation in the blood, leading to central nervous system dysregulation and autism. So you can see here, whether it be food allergens, whether it be certain inflammatory proteins, dysregulation of the immune system, all these things are driving autism and central nervous system disorders. This is why diet is so important and how we live is so important. This is for the protein casein. This is the milk protein. So we have naturally occurring endorphins. So, sometimes if you go for a run, you can get these endorphins. You play with your dog, play with your children, you can get endorphins. Sometimes you accomplish something, you can get endorphins. Working out will get you endorphins. All these things can get endorphins, and these are all normal and good, and they release dopamine. But what happens is there's another breakdown from casein, which is the milk protein, and they call them exorphins. And what happens is that these proteins, when they get broken down, unless your body's able to clear them, they will hit the same receptors at your normal endorphins, and this will increase too much dopamine in the cells, which can lead the cells to die. So if you think about it, this cell is in your central nervous system, you get too much release of dopamine, this creates too much excitatory tension in the cell, and it starts to die. And that's simply from taking in milk proteins, which is casein. So you can see all the different things that they're talking about, and again, the studies back all this up, these theories up of why they would happen. So you can see all the issues that you can develop in your central nervous system by simply just eating things that your body cannot handle. This is a wonderful article. This was published in 2002, and so this was published in a journal called the Alternative Medicine Review, and this is this is a woman who has a PhD in cell biology from the University of California at Berkeley. And I'm just going to read some of the things that she talks about, because I'm talking about the problem here, about, casein, gluten, and all this stuff. But sometimes just removing that from the diet isn't enough. You have to do other things. And so a lot of physicians and researchers have been trying to figure out strategies to help children with autism and even adults. And so one of the things that she mentions in here is she, of course, talks about the different strategies, dietary restrictions, removal of milk and other dairy products, and gluten, along with sugar, chocolate, preservatives, and food coloring. She mentions all those are beneficial. She also talks about testing for allergies or antibodies in there. And then she talks about this. And so right where she says this, gastrointestinal. So right here is just where I'm going to read real briefly, starting right there. And she says the following. She says, gastrointestinal improvements rest on controlling candida and other parasites. How many of you have heard about candida, right, in your gut? We hear that a lot. And a big chunk of that is due to our inability for some people to process carbohydrates. And so if you're unable to process carbohydrates the way, or you have bad gut bacteria, you can get candida in there, and that can increase inflammation and problems. And so this is also another strategy to helping children with autism. He goes on, and using probiotic bacteria and nutrients to correct the dysbiosis. Dysbiosis just simply means dysregulation of the bacteria in your gut, and decrease gut permeability. Detoxification of mercury and other heavy metals by DMSA. DMSA is dimercaptosuccinic acid, and I'll talk about that more. And it talks about chelation can have marked benefits. Documented sulfur oxidation, sulfation inadequacies calls for sulfur or sulfur repletion and other liver support. So basically what she's talking about is that some kids who have autism need to have enzymes and amino acids that will help them put sulfur on different products in their body, and that sulfur is very important for your immune or your antioxidant defense. She goes, many nutrient supplements are beneficial and well tolerated, including dimethylglycine, which you can find in your green leafies, some wheat products. But here's the problem. If you are unable to digest that, you're not getting dimethylglycine. And therefore, if you're not getting dimethylglycine, your cells are suffering. So this is why some of the supplementation would be good for children with autism. In combination with pyridoxine, vitamin B6, and magnesium, both of which benefit roughly half of autism spectrum diseases. Vitamins A, B3, and C, and folic acid, the minerals, calcium and zinc, cod liver oil, and digestive enzymes all offer benefit. Secretin, a triggering factor for digestion, is presently under investigation. Immune therapies, and they list them, and including long-chain omega-3 fatty acids. So what I'm telling you is there's a lot of different things available to use to treat autism. There's a lot of different things available. I'm not covering all these. I just wanted you to see what has been researched since 2002 to be used. Now, this is a letter written into a journal called Environmental Health Perspectives, and this was written in 2001. And in here, they are writing about mothers who ate a lot of fish while they were pregnant with their children, and them having autism. And they also mention mercury in different products like merthiolate. Has anyone heard of merthiolate? Merthiolate was used as an antiseptic. So in World War II, they used to use it in wound dressing. They would sprinkle mercury on your wound and you would get in there. I think merthiolate stopped being used like maybe in the 70s. They were using it all the way then. Certain injectables still have a little bit of mercury in them. And so again, if you're autistic and your body, or let's say you're not autistic and your body is unable to excrete these heavy metals, they become quite toxic to you. And so in this letter, they talk about how children with autism have an inability to get rid of these heavy metals in their body, and they know this, and so they're trying to figure out how do we get mercury out of children. So this is DMSA, as I told you, dimercaptosuccinic acid, and this is a chelator. And a chelator, what it does is it is a chemical that will bind to heavy metals and then attach itself to some other proteins or fibers, and then it will come out of your body. It'll come out in sweat or come out in your urine or feces. And so what they found here, in this study, and this was 2009, this study was only to look at the safety of using DSMA with children with autism. So it was only looking at the safety. And even though they just looked at the safety, they also just looked at what the behavioral changes were. And they noted almost, in some cases, miraculous changes when these children were being purged of these heavy metals. And they were peeing them out, and they were pooping them out, and they were noticing that they were improving with this. And so I don't know whatever happened. They probably didn't get funding, because if you suggest that mercury is causing or driving or harming kids with autism, somehow that's bad, and it's conspiracy theory. But, so I don't know, they didn't get funding, so they had to go a different direction, but nonetheless, they were able to see great changes, and they were going to do a second study, and it never got published. So I don't know what happened. This guy right here, James B. Adams, if you're ever interested in doing more research on autism, you will find his name come up a lot. He's from he's from Arizona State University. He has his name on a lot of papers dealing with the gut and autism. So again, DSMA is probably another good idea, mercury chelation. Does anyone know a natural way to get mercury out of the system? Anyone know a natural way? Charcoal, that's not bad, but there's another one as well. Charcoal's not bad. Cilantro. Cilantro is a natural mercury chelator.
Kidney beans as well.
Yeah, kidney beans, not a bad one as well. So cilantro is great. So some of you who are planning on having guac today, make sure there's cilantro in it. Get yourself hooked up. If there's no guac today, they didn't ask me, so my apologies. Another treatment for autism is vitamin B12. Vitamin B12, also B6. So here's a whole system of how this is biochemistry, and I'm very biased. I'm just going to let my bias come out. All right. So this is just a very small section of biochemistry and how your body uses folic acid or folate, vitamin B9, and how it goes through this cycle, and how this is methionine synthase, and how it helps take homocysteine and bring it back to methionine and these other products. This is S-medicinal methionine. This is S-additional histomethionine, and this makes adenosine. What you need to know about adenosine is that the currency of energy in your body is adenosine triphosphate. So to get to adenosine triphosphate, you need to make adenosine. Interesting, right? And then also with vitamin B9, you can convert a little bit of homocysteine to cystathionine, which cysteine, this is another amino acid, which will convert to glutathione or reduced glutathione, all right? And this is very important for detoxifying your cells, protecting them from oxidant distress, all right? So but here's the interesting thing, all right? This is what your body does with just essentially 2 vitamins, B12 and B9. That's it, right? This is just a very small window. Now, you mean to tell me that this all just came about by chance? Like this process here, this just, like, you know, it was just bubbling in a pond one day, lightning strikes, maybe some salt, some wind, and then boom, you get something like this? No, that didn't happen. This is too well designed. I'm sorry, I just had to say that. This is way too well designed. But here's the point you need to know about vitamin B12. Vitamin B12 takes homocysteine using methionine synthase and makes more methionine so you can make these other products which you need. Too much homocysteine buildup causes inflammatory markers in your arteries and also breaks down your tissue and leads to increased heart disease, strokes, and all these things. So one of the things that vegetarians have to be careful of, especially if they're very strict, is making sure they get enough B12, because if they don't, they're at a higher risk of strokes because of homocysteine, all right? If you get vitamin B9, you're taking both vitamin B12 and B9, then this homocysteine gets converted to cystathionine, which eventually gets to glutathione, which your body needs to fight all the oxidative stress that you go through. So the take home is that children with autism are having more homocysteine buildup. As a matter of fact, if you remember the statistic that I showed you, the average lifespan of children with autism is to age 36. And they do die of strokes, and they do die of heart attacks, and it may be that they have too much homocysteine buildup in their body. And so they need B12 to help convert this. They also need B9 to convert homocysteine back into glutathione to help them deal with oxidative stress. So one of the things that they can use is vitamin B12, and that's a good reason why. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the importance of why you should have a methyl B12 and a methylfolate if they have a mutation.
Yes. So maybe here too. So if you have a mutation, so this is the MTHFR enzyme, and if you have a mutation, you're unable to process B12 and B9 and get it to go back to methionine or get it to transfer into the cell. And so if this doesn't work, then you're going to get other byproducts. There's a whole nother, if this doesn't work, there's a whole nother, how would I put it, biochemical pathway that leads to bad outcomes for you, all right? Just so you understand. So this is why you'd want a methyl group attached to this, so that you will actually, if you happen to have a problem with this enzyme, you'll be able to still complete this process. That's the idea over there. So just so you know. So anyways, to this diagram here, I just want you to see this. The other reason why B12 is also important is that you can get glycine and glutamine, and glutamine can be converted to glutamate. And if you don't have enough cysteine and glutathione, this glumine, this can actually be converted to glutamate, and that will hurt the cell as well. So again, the B12, the B9, all of this helps with cell regulation. Children with autism may have too much glutamate into the cell, which will harm the cell. They may not be able to convert folic acid into methionine, or folic acid to convert homocysteine into cysteine and glutathione. In other words, the things that you need to make sure this all works are inhibited in children with autism. So B12, B9 are things that you absolutely need to get there. And again, I don't have time to read through all of this. You're welcome to take a picture of this. This just talks about how they gave oral B12 and other vitamins and some of the improvements they had and some of the adverse side effects that they had. And it was actually pretty impressive how the children were able to improve just by taking B12 and B9. So it's very helpful for that. Here's another one. This again we talked about candidiasis. And so one of the issues is that when you have yeast overgrowth, you get arabinose in the stool. And when you get high arabinose in the stool, this leads to other inflammatory markers and neurofibrillary tangles. Has anyone heard about this? Neurofibrillary tangles, anyone heard of that? That's right, Alzheimer's. Yes. So think about it. Yeast overgrowth leads to these inflammatory markers and problems, right? Which can lead to Alzheimer's type symptoms. Now, we're talking about autism here, but they're just pointing out that yeast overgrowth, and notice how they go here. Immune deficiency. So let's say you get an infection, and children with autism don't have very good immune systems. They get an infection. You pump them with antibiotics, kills all the normal bacteria, yeast overgrowth, problems. So notice this tangled web that we have that has happened because we don't take care of the gut, and mostly our overutilization of antibiotics. If you're prescribed an antibiotics for a virus, wait a little bit, try something else. Don't just take antibiotics. We have it in our soap, we have it. And here's the other problem, is that, did you know that 85% of all antibiotics given in the United States, do you know where they're given? Animals, that's right, livestock. Livestock are injected with 85%. So when you're eating your steak, you're eating your chicken, you're eating all that, you're getting a low dose of antibiotics, which can help kill the normal bacteria and lead to these problems here. You wonder why so many of us have yeast overgrowth and all these problems. It may be we're getting low dose of antibiotics everywhere. And there's probably not a soap that you're going to use that doesn't have low dose of antibiotics. So you just got to think about that. It's kind of crazy. Anyways, this is another article talking about the different gut bacteria in there. I don't have time to go through it all, but one of the things that you must know if you're going to try to put your kids on some sort of bacteria or probiotics is that you want it to have bifidobacterium. You want it to have something. You want it to have that. It can have all the other strains, but you want it to have that one for sure, because kids with autism and Asperger's have almost none in their system. So that's just why I put up the slide. So this is another reason why that's important. Another thing that they're doing, and I'm going to be quicker here. Another thing they're doing is they're doing fecal swaps. So remember I talked about Clostridium difficile. One of the treatments for Clostridium difficile when it's raging in your gut is that they give you high doses of vancomycin, which is an antibiotic. But sometimes that doesn't work. So what they do is they have a fecal transplant where they take healthy fecal material from someone who is allegedly good, and they put it inside you, and that colony of bacteria then crowds out the Clostridium difficile, and you live. Well, they started doing this with children with autism, and notice this is from the Arizona State University, and this is by James B. Adams again. And 2 years after they did this, these children are still improving. 2 years after getting a fecal transplant, these children are still improving. So that tells you how important gut microbes are to affecting your brain. This is actually the study. Don't have time to go over it. This is a study talking about all the different supplements and things that they use. They use fish oil, folic acid, B6, B9, B12, B2, coenzyme Q10, and then of course they mentioned what they call a healthy gluten, casein-free diet. So I just want to point this out. A lot of people, because gluten-free is popular, people go to the store and they can buy a bag of Oreos that says gluten-free on it. That's not healthy. I hate to burst anyone's bubble. You're like, look, I'm healthy. No, you're not. That's not healthy, all right? So just so you know, just because it says gluten-free, they sell gluten-free beer, and I don't recommend anyone drink that either. So I'm just telling you that just because it says gluten-free doesn't mean it's healthy, and just because it says it's casein-free doesn't mean it's healthy. You need to eat a whole food, I would suggest plant-based diet, but for children with autism, you need to be careful about what they take in. You should probably do an elimination diet, figure out what they can tolerate, but just don't feed them junk because it says gluten-free. And again, these are more of the supplements that they were giving these children, and they improved. They noticed the improvements there. I don't have time to go through all the improvements, but they definitely improved. I just put the chart up there. Again, this is another article that goes all the way back in 2002 talking about the importance of gluten casein-free diets and how they benefited children with autism. This is another article about supplementation with glutathione. Remember, we talked about, when I mentioned glutathione, too much. And I'm turboing all the way through. There we go. So I talked about glutathione, and I talked about how it is your master antioxidant, and it is responsible for a number of reactions in your body. Let's see if this will catch up. Maybe not. Hopefully not frozen. That'll be exciting. There we go. So here it is. So remember I talked about glutathione and its importance in the system. And so, as I mentioned, it's important here, and this is going to help bodies, especially your central nervous system, deal with oxidative stress. This is good for people with Parkinson's. This is good for people with Alzheimer's. This is good for pretty much anyone. And so what they did is that they, in this study that I'm going to pull back up, they did glutathione supplementation with these children. They did oral glutathione, and they did transdermal, so they had a glutathione patch. And they noticed that there were great improvements with the kids who were doing oral glutathione, because in autism, your antioxidant defense is impaired. So that improved it. Here's the last one I'm going to talk about. Well, let's see. I think it's pretty much the last one. Anyways, this is the last one I'm going to talk about. This is magnesium. And magnesium is probably one of the master minerals for your body. I think there's over 400 different biochemical reactions where magnesium is a cofactor. But it's particularly important for the central nervous system. And so notice what they show here. This is just simple diagrams. So they say if you have low magnesium, this increases in substance P. Substance P is essentially substance pain. So increase in pain or increased inflammatory markers, increased gut-brain barrier permeability, glial activation. Glial cells are the sort of nanny cells in your brain. And so these are constantly dividing and trying to maintain homeostasis in your brain. And when this gets activated, you get all kinds of problems. And when you get these problems, you can get an increase of nitric oxide, prostaglandins, which are another series of inflammatory metabolites. Same thing with cytokines. Increased calcium in your central nervous system destroys the cells, and increased reactive oxygen species, which is just essentially oxidants. And what this creates, neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration. So this is what happens when you have low magnesium here. And again, they talk about here how it's a factor in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease as well. So magnesium is important. One of the ways to get it inside children, especially with autism, if they're not eating enough, is Epsom salt bath. And a lot of us who have back pain, neurodegenerative diseases, and all the other stuff, you will do yourself a favor if maybe once a week, once every 2 weeks, you relax and do an Epsom salt bath. Nice, warm Epsom salt bath. Get a lot of magnesium into the system because you want it into your cells, and especially in the central nervous system, so it can protect it. And this is no different than kids with autism as well. So the last one, this is L-carnitine. L-carnitine is responsible for fatty acid. And so the cells, each of your cells, especially in the central nervous system, need the ability to break down certain fats in order for them to power up the mitochondria. And this is important for them to function. And so acetyl L-carnitine, this study is on L-carnitine. Acetyl L-carnitine actually goes through the blood-brain barrier and can help children with autism to process fatty acids better, derive more energy, and therefore keep the cells alive. So there's a lot of things that can be done. And I know I went through a lot of different stuff. But at first, I would say it starts with getting things right in your life. So first of all, cleaning out your cabinet, making sure you're eating very good, unprocessed foods, high in nutrients. Second, you need, especially if your child has autism or you think you have something, get tested, see if what you have going on in your gut, see if you have yeast overgrowth, things like that. And then there's other lifestyle factors you can make. And then there's supplements that you can take, acetyl L-carnitine, magnesium, B12, B9. You can get all of those in your body, and that may be able to help too. But I would also suggest this. Especially for those of us who don't have autism. In the beginning, I read a text from Revelation chapter 10, and it was about doing the Lord's work, and it was about Him prophesying again. I would like to submit to you that another important thing to do is to restore your trust in God. If you're going through these problems with your gut, and you're going through these problems with your mind, you need to find a place that you can trust. You need to find someone you can trust and put your confidence in. And I say there's no one greater than our Lord Jesus Christ. So I would encourage you to consider that and to pray about it, because He's the one who designed the brain. He's the one who understands the real connection between the gut and the brain. And if we're going to find healing at all, it's going to be through Him. After all, if it wasn't for Him, we wouldn't be talking about any of this anyways. So thank you so much for your time.